Hello, this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. A podcast that talks about human development and psychology to help you maybe figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And we've been talking about death, and we're going to continue to do that. Today, many people who develop AIDS in their 20s or 30s, often gay men, must face issues of death and dying at an age when they would normally be dealing with such issues of young adulthood as establishing an intimate relationship. So, this is something that came about. There are all kinds of rumors about how it came about, and there may be some truth in those. But anyway, safe sex is the way to stop that. And there are people who they don't want to do that because it doesn't feel as good. But if you want to stay alive and not have AIDS, practice safe sex. Rather than having a long lifetime of losses as gradual preparation for the final loss of life, the gay man may find his own health, the health of his friends, and the fabric of his community all collapsing at once. And that can be true. That was in the 80s. That was a really big deal. It's less so now, but it's still a thing. And like I said, as people have learned more, safe sex is the way to go. In middle age, most people realize more keenly than before that they are indeed going to die. And like I said, if I'm the first one telling you this, I'm sorry. I hate to deliver the bad news to you, but if you were born, you're going to die. Their bodies send them signals that they are not as young, agile, and hardy as they once were. And if you're middle-aged, you know that's true. Suddenly you can't do things you used to do, or it's harder, or you get aches and pains when you try to bend over and, do simple things like put your shoe on. So, yeah, your body will let you know when things are just a little too difficult for it anymore. More and more they think about how many years they may have left, and of how to make the most of those years. And, I know for me, I was told in 2004 I was going to die in 3 years. So I was trying to do everything I could and, love my kids as much as I could. Thankfully, that nurse practitioner who told me that was wrong. And the doctor that I just recently had said, yeah, she shouldn't have told you that. Just because it was up there 24% over doesn't mean that was going to be it, especially, because we're not familiar with everything that goes into this yet. It's a fairly new thing, and like I said, when I first was told I had it, it was a blood disorder, and then they changed it to a blood cancer, and now they're kind of backing off that, but like I said, I went to full remission. It was only 10% over, and the doctor said I wouldn't even say you had it. I wouldn't even worry about that, but of course the last blood work now is back up to 12, so it's going the wrong way, so yeah, let's get it back down, please. But yeah, you think about how many years do I have left, and how do I make the most of those? I had made tapes for my family to listen to after I was gone. I had my, funeral all planned out and everything, but, thankfully she was wrong. Often, especially after the death of both parents, there is a new awareness of being the older generation next in line to die. Now, I still have one of mine. My husband still has one of his. So, we're not to that point yet. But I have heard people talking about that. It's like, well, now we're next. Older adults may have mixed feelings about the prospect of dying. And I think that also is a reflection on the way they've been living. If you've been living a good life, it might not be such a problem. And if you've not lived much, then you might not really want to go. Physical losses and other problems and losses of old age may diminish their pleasure in living and their will to live. I know a man who says he's just sitting there waiting to die. He said, I don't even know why I'm alive, but I am, and so I guess I'll live my life while I'm here. But on the other hand, when 414 hospitalized patients in their 80s and 90s were asked how much time they would be willing to trade for excellent health, about 2 out of 3 were unwilling to give up more than 1 month of life. Because you just want that one little piece more, one little piece more. It's like I say, to my husband, I say, I can't die, I got things to do. According to Erickson, older adults who resolve the final critical alternative of integrity versus despair achieve acceptance both of what they have done with their lives and of their impending death. That is something that you really need to do. Is you need to get your head together. You need to be accepting that, like I said, if you were born, you're going to die. And realize that it's not the end. I believe there's an afterlife. And a lot of people do. Oh, excuse me. Some people don't. Some people believe this is it and you die and then that's it. You're gone. I think that's sad that there are people who believe that. One way to accomplish this resolution is through life review. And that is something they recommend when they do counseling for people who have terminal illnesses. Like at one point I was told I was going into palliative care. But that's what they say you should do, is a life review. Sit down with a notebook or whatever, or just, a tape recorder, and start talking about when you were a kid, as early back as you can remember, and review your entire life. And see if there are things that you need to talk to somebody about, because, people have regrets. See if there's someone you need to talk to, and you want to talk to them about something and hash something out. You might want to go for something that you never got to do when you were younger, and do that. A life review will let you see how everything was. Sit there from the time you were born to that day, and review your entire life. And it might take days, weeks, months, but, just note down, if you're busy about something else, left off, like a stop for lunch or whatever, left off at age for this incident, So, a life review can help you come to terms with your life so far. So many people like to run on and not think about that, not deal with that, because that upsets their little homeostasis. But if you want to die well, you need to do that. You need to have a life review, see where there are problems, see where you might need to make reparations, or you might want to talk to some people about some stuff, or, do something that you would have liked to have done and you hadn't gotten to do yet. Because it's not too late until the day that it's too late. So, people who feel that their lives have been meaningful and who have adjusted to their losses may be better off and able to face death. So, let's face it, none of our lives were perfectly what we wanted it to be. When we were a kid, we imagined this great life we were going to have, and no one got that. So, there were losses in your life. And you need to be able to adjust to that. Face the facts. Life's not perfect. And I wish this would have worked, this would have worked, I wish I could have done this, but it, might not be a thing. So if you're able to, see what good you did in your life and how there was meaning to your life, and how you overcame, the bad things in your life, and how you overcame your losses and dealt with it to come back and continue, that can be very helpful to you in being ready to die. Especially difficult losses that may occur during adulthood are the death of a spouse, a parent, and a child. The people who are closest to you. Excuse me here, I gotta itch my back a little bit. I look like a bear. The people who are closest to you, when you lose them, that is especially hard. Less publicly noted is the loss of a potential offspring through miscarriage or stillbirth, and some of us women have had those, and it can be devastating. Surviving a spouse. Widowhood is one of the greatest emotional challenges that can face a human being. And I know some widows and widowers, and it is definitely hard. Because this is a person you built your life with, and suddenly they're not there anymore. And it may have been sudden, it may have been gradual, but, there's a lot of what do I do now? What do I do with my life now? Is my life even worth living now? So that's probably the hardest one. Because women tend to live longer than men and to be younger than their husbands, they are more likely to be widowed. So, unfortunately, ladies, that's the bad news. It's like we usually outlive our men, so the chances are you might end up being a widow. Women also tend to be widowed younger than men. So, like I said, we outlive the guys usually. So, once we start getting older and might not think in your 60s, 70s, 80s, but then it happens. 1/3 of women lose their husbands by age 65. So, that's a pretty good number. But it is not until 75 that an equal proportion of men lose their wives. So, the widowers are going to be 10 years older than a lot of the widows. Effects of widowhood differ for men and women because we are different. Men and women are different. We know that. And so the way we cope and adjust is going to be different. Women may also show their distress more openly, but men also may feel that they have lost their moorings. I've only known a few widowers who survived their spouse, and that is a thing that is common amongst them, is that their wife held things down. Their wife basically was the organizer, planner, manager of their life. And now that person's gone, and so they're kind of lost. Friends and family usually rally to the mourner's side immediately after the death, but then may go back to their own lives, which leaves the person feeling alone again. Older widows are more likely than older widowers to stay in touch with friends from whom they receive social support. So women are more open and will make an effort to contact people than men. Men will try to, be tough, keep the stiff upper lip, all that macho crap that they shouldn't do. And, won't reach out, and then they're alone. On the other hand, widows whose husbands were their chief breadwinners may experience economic hardships and may fall into poverty. And that's why in the Bible it talks about, taking care of the widows, because that's a very real thing. We still do not have financial equality with men, unfortunately. But a lot of widows, without the income, especially if the husband was not retired and they died while they were still working and they don't have a pension coming in or Social Security or anything like that, that can be a life buster there. Even when both spouses have been employed, the loss of one income can be a blow, and it certainly can. I know in my case it certainly would be, because I only make a few thousand a year, so if we lost my husband's income, that would be a major blow. When a husband is widowed, he has to buy many of the household services his wife provided, because let's face it, women are taught how to keep house for the most part. Now, I know men who do housework. I'm not going to say they're all bad. I know a man who's, raising his kids while the wife works because she makes more money. But, in general, men, oh my gosh, I got a gnat or something bugging me. Ow. Oh my gosh. Nasty. Next to the fruit bowl over here. Men are not great at housework, mostly. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that's all men, but a lot of times men need help with cleaning. Some men, they don't go to the grocery store. We can now order the groceries to come to your door, and that's what they do, because they don't like going and walking to the store. So, men in general sometimes have to hire out some help to keep their house. The survivor of a long marriage is likely to face many emotional and practical problems, because the longer you're together, the more you've invested, emotional collateral into this relationship, and financial collateral, mental, you've had built this life together. So when that one of the pillars is gone, then, you're going to feel that loss emotionally. You're going to feel that loss mentally, physically, and all, spiritually. You might start doubting your higher power, for what they did to you, even though they didn't really do anything to you. A good marriage can leave a gaping emotional void. And, it certainly does. If we get this far, there's a class on marriage and how that affects you. And it does affect you in all your ways. So when that is suddenly gone from your life, that can, leave you with some holes. Even if the marriage was a troubled one, the bereaved spouse is likely to feel a loss. And let's face it, even if you have a troubled marriage, you all loved each other at one point enough to get married. So, there's something there. There's feelings there. So, even when the marriage is not great, when you break up, you're still going to be sad. You're still going to cry. Because, let's face it, there was a spot in your heart for that person, and it's going to be sad. This loss may be especially hard for a woman who has structured her life and her identity around caring for her husband. And there are a lot of women like that. They are stay-at-home, homemakers, stay-at-home moms, whatever you want to call it. And that's what they've made their life. And my grandma told me, she said, a woman should have her own money and her own life. She should not make her life revolve around a man. And that's because she did not have the greatest experience with her husband. I am a believer in that women should have their own life. Even if you don't work outside the home, if you choose to stay home and work at home, you should still be doing something with your time to, keep yourself from being in a total disastrous situation if you were to lose your spouse. Widowed women have elevated rates of depression, at least during the first 5 years after the death. And that, just makes sense. There is a strong likelihood that a widowed person, especially a man, will soon follow a spouse to the grave. So, women are a little more resilient about that. Men, like one of my other grandma said, men never grow up. They're basically just giant babies. So, that was her opinion on men. But, men are not as resilient. Basically, they usually go from a mom to a wife who takes care of them. And so when that is gone, they are not super happy about it. They are not as resilient as women are. And they're not, too keen on the idea of being alone. In a large-scale Finnish study, men who lost their wives within a 5-year period were 21% more likely to die. So, that's less than a fourth, but still, that's a lot of men who decide life's just not worth living without the wife. The excess mortality figure for widowed women was 10%. So only 10% of the women, are just unable to cope without the husband. The risk was greater for young adults and for those whose loss was still fresh. And of course, we know when we're younger, we're very much more emotionally immature. We are not as good at adapting and coping. So the younger that happens, the more, it's kind of the Romeo and Juliet thing where you can't live without the other person, in your own mind. So that's why that is. And again, if you can get over the first year, they say, then you'll be okay. Many studies have found older adults to adjust better to widowhood than younger adults. And again, that's because of emotional maturity, adaptability, and resilience that you learn as you get older. In general, though, age is not a major factor in the grieving process. Coping skills are. So the better your coping skills are, the better you cope with things, the easier time you're going to have it. So, if you're not great at coping with things, that is something that maybe you can talk to a therapist about, and become a little better at coping with things. because life is not going to hand you everything. It's not going to be easy, and you might have to do that. People who have had practice in coping with loss and have developed effective coping resources, self-esteem, and competence in meeting the demands of everyday life are better able to deal with bereavement. So if you haven't had a lot of life experience, you might want to start getting out there and get some. If you have problems with self-esteem, you might want to go to a life coach, a therapist, and work on your self-esteem so that you can bring that up to a point where you have some competence in meeting the challenges of life, because death is not going to be kind, and you might have a terminal illness that you have to deal with and think about, and certainly when you're losing someone, you're going to have to be able to deal with that. So that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, please like and share this video. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.